Well, if we want to talk about moderation, I think I want to approach it in the sociological sense, where we are talking about values, about behavior of the individual and the social collective, rather than in the political governance sense when you talk about laws, regulation, wars, because we do know that there's such thing called halal violence, where state and government are allowed to kill people, to go to war, and create. Well, like for example, when we talk about Iraq and Iran, or Iraq and Afghanistan, the United Nations says they are allowed to be attacked because they are supposed to be harboring terrorists. When we know the data later came out is a falsification. So for me, this is where we have to draw the line between what I call violence, legitimized violence, which is political governance sake, because we know, like in Malaysia, we have penal code for crime conducted by people. Yeah, but here we are referring to not so much violence in that sense, but the sociological violence in the sense that you deviate from the normal behavior of the human being, that you should be peaceful, you should be helping each other, and suddenly you've thought that violence is the solution. I think this is what we are referring to being moderate, not choosing violence as an option in conducting interrelationship between groups of people and individuals.
So are we talking about diplomacy versus military might?
Well, in some sense, yes, but diplomacy here, not in the technical foreign affairs sense. We are talking in terms of social collectives. Can be small, can be big, can be between groups of people who have different organization. Because one of the important things that we don't take note is that human beings, when they get together and they are from different groups, categories like ethnicity, religion becomes very important social organizing principles of differences. So when people of two ethnic groups meet together, they say, oh, we are different ethnic. And when the same ethnic group, say the Malays meet together, oh no, I'm from Kelantan, you are from Johor. So there is this organization, social organizing principle of difference, this group that we create. So in many ways, once you create that, which is a boundary, then what do? Do you want to cross the boundary? You want to defend the boundary? Or you want to collectively say, oh, I'm a Kelantan diaspora, so Budu is my main identity indicator. So this is how people relate to each other.
So would you say these different categories that we put ourselves in are more often than not, or sometimes, the cause of some of the world's problems?
I'll give you an example, not in the world, in Malaysia itself. When in 1871, when we introduced the census by the British, there were 36 to 38 categories. Rawa, Minangkabau, Jawa, Kelantan, Melayu, Bugis. And then the British collapsed it into Malay, Chinese, Indian, and others. Whoever cannot fit in the three, become others. It's fine. Conceptually and physically and also socially is fine. But the moment you give the category a value, like for example, Malays can have special land, Chinese can be given license, Indian. Now, when each category has a value, then the value defines the ethnicity. So this is where you see the new economic policy has become a problem to the people, because it's perceived as giving purely to the Malays all these facilities. But actually, if we see carefully, if the Malays wants to construct a building, 99% of the hardware shop in Malaysia belongs to the Chinese. So how can you, so that means the Malay have to depend on the Chinese to construct that building. So, but then because the new economic policy is about giving privileges to the Malays, so suddenly we focus on the Malays. So this is what I mean. We give value. The moment we give value to an ethnic group, then that value become a disadvantage or advantage. So this is what I see, how quarrel and conflicts. At one time, Palestinian belongs to the Palestinian. Palestine belongs to Palestinian. In one stroke, the United Nations decided that there is an Israeli state of Israel. Yeah, and suddenly the whole world transformed. Who becomes the refugees? The Palestinian. So
and not only that, I mean, today, if you read in the media and the way people talk about it in the coffee shops, it's perceived as a religion of war. People forget it was a fight for land.
Yes. Well, you have to separate between nationalism and religion here. You see, every time people ask me to support this movement about Palestine, I said, look, this is not an Islamic fight. This is a fight between Muslims who rightfully should be there, has been chased away. So it is a nationalism issue. So we don't confuse. Just because we are Muslims, so that we have to support them. Not that I'm not supporting them. We have to understand the principle why we are actually engaged in this. We just can't engage this because, oh, people play football, so we have to play with the Palestinian. I mean, I said this is a bit silly on our part to take it too simplistically. So I think this is what happens. And this happens also because there is a certain level of propaganda that is going on, and people manipulate this to gain support. I mean, look, when everyone demonstrates in Kuala Lumpur about Palestine, it's not an issue. But when it is other demonstration, it becomes an issue. So for me, it's why double standard in a sense. So I think this is the impact of giving a particular category value and political value, political meaning. But what to do? But people do that politically.
Do you think these values also sometimes lead to extremism? I mean, on both sides of the spectrum.
Well, I think it's interesting to look at extremism in a populist sense. In the current context, it's always associated with Islam. But I think the Prime Minister this morning said clearly that extremism can also be not in the form of violent. It can be very non-violent extremism, like, Mr. Macduff went away with 51 billion of people's money through his pyramid project, and everyone was violated, everyone lost their properties, but because there's no blood. I think the spilling of blood is related to ritual of killing that makes violent death form become more dramatic and more traumatic in a sense. I think this is why we seem to associate extremism with bloody violence, not a silent violent act, so I think he made a good distinction, but he also made a clarification that we shouldn't focus too much on a violence that costs lives. But then life is so valuable to human being. I think that's why it is more dramatic and traumatic to see death rather than people lose 50 million ringgit. Yeah.
I think one good example of that, of bloodshed and protests and people coming together and might have been misinterpreted at certain times are student protests. Look at Tiananmen Square, Tehran Square. I mean, even in our region, Indonesia.
Yeah. Well, for me, when a society is created of many components of different kinds, and even though people say Japanese is homogeneous, I said no, there are Koreans, Japanese, there are Ainus, there are the original Aboriginal group. So the Japan that we imagine homogeneous is only formed after the Meiji Restoration, when they have to speak one language called Japanese that we know today. Before that, they were speaking their own Kansai band, Kanto band. They don't even understand each other. So I think in one sense, the struggle is between homogenization and heterogeneity.
Right.
Now the question is, when there is heterogeneity, all attempt, because of the modern nation state originally created in Europe after the Enlightenment, unity in diversity, and the unity is uniformity. The struggle is to make sure same speak one language, one culture, one nation. So I think this oneness that we talk about, which is spiritual in some sense, being transformed into nationalist movement, has become a problem in itself. And I think we experienced this in South Asia because there was indigenous religion, and then we have Hinduism, and then we have Buddhism, then we have Islam, then we have Christian, then we have Baha'i, then we have many other religions. Now, the embedding of this religion at different period has created a different admixture. Now, to what extent any one of them can become a source of a problem, we don't know. This is what we see. So that is why in some ways if we are not able to actually come to terms that these are differences that we have to deal with, and the society is not mature enough to accept the fact that they are different, you agree to disagree, then it's going to be problematic, as we see not only in the Philippines, in Thai, in Indonesia. So far we managed to navigate this problem very well in Malaysia, even though we are not making everyone happy.
Right, okay, but you spoke about oneness.
Yeah.
What about One Malaysia concept? What are your thoughts on that?
One Malaysia concept is an expression of hope rather than a reality, because Tun Razak, the father of Najib, introduced in 1971 on page 1 of the red book called Second Malaysia Plan 71 to 75. He made it very clear. The ultimate of Malaysia is to create national unity. That was what he said on page 1. The ultimate aim. We still are seeking that national unity. We still dream, we still hope. So then Mahathir defined it. Okay, in 2020, we'll have that united Malaysian nation, Bangsa Malaysia. And then Najib probably didn't see it coming. So he said, now let's stimulate it again. We have one Malaysia. I think this is what is happening. But I believe we may need 2050, not 2020. Yeah? So this is not enough, 2020. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so we are admitting then there are still undertones of racial strife in the country.
Look, it's not racial strife. I would say we talk of racial differences. We talk of racial grievances. But in some ways, we talk. And the talk is the cure of all this. To be able to express the pent-up feeling now with blogs and so on. And we have already organized this indirectly through the structure of education. Our education system is not homogeneous. Our newspaper is not homogeneous, media is not homogeneous. You go to Australia, you don't listen. There are Greek and Italian in Australia, but they don't have Greek and Italian station. In Malaysia, you have Tamil station, you have Malay station, Orang Asli station. I tell you, they marvel in Malaysia. And yet they are talking about inequality in Malaysia, when they can't even speak in their own language on the radio in Australia. I always complain to my Australian friend, you speak so much about yourself. Can the Italian make Italian joke? Cannot. In Malaysia, you make Tamil joke, we laugh. We don't know what we are laughing. I say, So because everyone is laughing. So I think there is some reality check we have to do about our differences. We quarrel, we argue because we accept the differences. In Australia, you only speak English. Otherwise, other languages not important. Right. And for me, they are more homogeneous and more strict. In Malaysia, yeah, you have national language. But when you go to the shop, you don't speak national language.
I mean, we also have very strong cultural ties within each other. I think it's within the nature of the country. But do you also think, coming from an academic background, does education have a lot to do with it? Or is it completely separate?
There are 4 things that I observe very important in Malaysia, with or without education. Number 1 is assimilation. Because it happened before education was introduced in the modern education. Assimilation simply means one group accepts the other group. Peranakan is the best example of assimilation in Semenanjung. But in Sarawak and Sabah, it's an everyday thing. Okay. And then the second is accommodation. I accept you are different from me. I respect what you have and you respect what I have. So I eat halal food. Come to my house, you have to eat this food. But if I want to come to your house, can you please prepare halal food? I will come. Or if not, go and buy something. We do this. We go out of the way to please the other party. And we'll never serve all this nice daging rendang to our Hindu friends. Because we know, don't do that, please. So, to recognize that we are different and accommodate is the second principle in our daily life in Malaysia. The third principle is cultural borrowing. Nasi lemak is not a Malay food anymore. Every restaurant, Chinese restaurant, Indian restaurant, they got nasi lemak. Of course, there are 15 different types of sambal, from the most pedas to the least pedas. Why? We have adopted and changed it according to our taste. The same thing, you go to near the Masjid Jami', that railway station, you wait there and you watch bird watching, you see all these girls wearing baju kurung. They are not Malay girls. They're Chinese girls. I'm disappointed, but actually I'm happy too at the same time. So I think we do cultural borrowing quite a lot. I mean, Malay, when I grew up, I never remember eating noodles. And suddenly, I like kway teow, noodle. Now why? We borrow. Now you go to Hari Raya, if there's no Moruku, there's no Hari Raya. Where is Moruku? It's not my grandmother's invention. It's belonging to another group, an ethnic group, and we happily accept it, even though it's not like the original one that I know. Yeah, this is what I say. Yeah. So in a way, and the fourth one is there's a lot of intermarriages, and there's a lot more. We give less credit to intermarriages, because why? We only hear people who divorce. So we hear. I was asked many times by my friend to comment on these marriages between Muslim and non-Muslim. And I said to them, when they fall in love, they don't invite me to the wedding. But when they fall out in love, they want me to comment. Cannot. I said, not fair. I must come to the wedding first. Because I know, why are you falling in love with this man? Or this woman? Why are you sacrificing, giving up everything? And now 5 years later, I said, no, I don't like this. No, that's not my problem. I said. So it is quite interesting how individual problem has become a society's problem. Why? I don't know. Probably the wife is not happy with the relationship. He sees other men can perform better. So he didn't tell us those stories. He only tells, oh, this is Indian case, Malay case, Islamic, he want to take my children. I think we are being misinformed and disinformed all the time.
But that's also the way it is with some of the world's problems, is it not?
Yeah.
We only see what's on the outside.
Yes. Well, I think this is not only Malaysian, of course. Yeah. We know that, I mean, I always say this. The world leaders are peranakan by definition. Obama, peranakan. Mahathir peranakan. In the sense of concept, yeah?
Right.
And everyone is peranakan. So in a strange way, the very thing that we want to retain this pureness, actually, the mixture that one gives the flavor, true enough. So, but you cannot and never will be able to stop differences to become a source of conflict. You cannot stop that. You have only to see within the family, between the children, the older one, the younger one, the girls and the boys, because there are values in the society that can cause this friction.
So what do you think then is going to be the factor that's going to make the global movement of moderates work? Does it start at home? Does it start with our leaders? Does it start in schools?
There are two things that we don't actually see clearly now, which I can see very clearly. When the Prime Minister announced Institute Wasatiyah and the chair Wasatiyah, he is addressing a local constituency. Why? He's addressing the Malay, who considers Islam as most important thing of their identity. So Dato' Sri Najib has to use the word Wasatiyah to make sense the Islamic role in moderation. Then to the world he talks about moderation, because he's not only talking to Muslim but also non-Muslim. But for me, even inside Malaysia, he's also talking about UMNO or Malay, or being the dominant partner in the ruling party. We have our concept and principle to guide the whole country. And I think in some sense it's true, in some sense may be contested for the reason of federalism, because we are a federalist, because religion is not controlled by the federal government. You know that. So state government controls religion, education, judiciary. So in many ways, he could be addressing this problem of Wasatiyah among ourselves. We have to, before we tell the world, we must ourselves show.
So in other words, it begins with us.
Yes, I think it has to be.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Shamsul.
You're welcome. Thank you.